Now, here's a sad milestone. It's a year today since the first Covid-related death in the West Midlands. And since then, we've lived through a year that nobody will forget.
Well, for those who have lost loved ones in the pandemic, these 12 months have been particularly challenging. Callum Watkinson has been talking to some of them and finding out what some communities are doing to memorialise these strange times and the lives that the virus has taken.
Authorities are working to identify the virus in the city of Wuhan.
In the first few months of last year, as the virus made its way westwards from China, through Europe and on towards our shores, some of us began to put on masks.
We might have to get used to this.
Others felt a brave face would suffice.
And I shook hands with everybody.
Noting horror stories.
Coronavirus claims 2 lives on board the cruise ship.
But on the 9th of March, Covid-related death completed its mutation from international to national to local headline as people in the West Midlands began to die.
What more can you tell us?
We know the patient was in their 70s and had underlying health conditions.
Perhaps watching that report, Rex Williams was safe, or so thought his family, in his care home in Coventry. But the virus from China crept in there, and on the 20th of April, it took his life. A year down the track, his son Charlie cannot yet come to terms with the manner of his passing.
I believe my father died on his own. You know, that's what I believe. And I know many other bereaved families have said that their loved ones have died on their own, which it's no way for someone to die. It's just horrendous in every way possible.
And more horrendous still, perhaps, even as this virus takes one family member, it robs the rest of the chance to comfort one another.
Afro-Caribbeans, we have a thing you call 9 Night, which is before the funeral, and we celebrate the person's life and the memories. You know, all those things we couldn't do because of the restrictions. So it just added pain to the whole grieving process.
The naval officer who established the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire said it was, much like the 9 Nights tradition, a celebration of life lived.
It has been drafted into
Those whose calling is to comfort the living say funerary traditions are a vital ingredient in the processing of grief, as is that final moment together.
It can help with the acceptance because they were there, they were able to potentially see that their loved ones was at peace and they were with them, you know, and they sat with them for the final breath in those hours. Rather than on those last moments with COVID, they would have potentially seen their loved one through an iPad or a phone. So that's not real. It's like, no, it's not happening, it's just a play. It's not, because they're not there, they can't accept it.
There will be no memorial here to the victims of this pandemic. These monuments are for those deemed to have suffered or sacrificed for others. The management here do believe, though, that there is both scope and demand for a memorial for NHS and other key workers, and they say that's the advice they'll give the government when it's appropriate to do so. Nevertheless, quiet efforts are underway across the region to create something similar for local victims. Micro-arboretums, perhaps you might say. Modest they may be, like this tree in Telford Town Park, but it's hoped its growing branches will provide some support as the town recovers.
The kind of conversations I've had with members in the community has been that it's been hard, and how to overcome this and how they're going to be able to understand and accept their grief. When they come out to this beautiful town park, they have a little quiet place to go and obviously remember their loved ones they lost to this pandemic.
In Stoke-on-Trent, they've gone a step further, repurposing the Rose Garden in Fenton Park as the city's area of reflection. More than 1,300 daffodils will grow here, one for every Covid death at Staffordshire's largest hospitals.
It's been really tough. I think people's mental health has really suffered. It's not just been about loss, it's been about isolation. When people have been taken into hospital poorly, you can't go and visit people like you would have been able to normally. You can't hug people. It's just been hard, and we just wanted somewhere nice for people to just come and sit and think about the people that they've lost.
People like Ruby Green. Originally from Guyana via Trinidad, she has friends all around the world, relationships that stretch back decades. In just 3 weeks, though, in the early days of the pandemic, she lost 3 of them.
One was in London, one was in New York, and one was in New Jersey. But I knew them since I was a teenager, which is a long, long time ago. Gloria, my friend in London who died, nobody could be with her at the last to say goodbye. And then the funeral, only 10 people were allowed, and they were socially distanced. So we couldn't hug each other, we couldn't comfort each other. There was nothing we could do. So it was really, really sad. It was sudden death, but sudden death with a difference. Because even when people die suddenly, you could say goodbye. But in these cases, it was just sudden, you're gone, and it's as if you didn't exist, you know.
Ruby has found bereavement support groups a great help. But for Charlie Williams, sorrow is best expressed in action. He believes his father's death was avoidable and is prominent in one of the largest of the groups calling for a public inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic.
This is an open wound to me and our thousands of bereaved families across the country. It's an open wound. We've got no closure. We've got no answers.
With the onset of spring, there is a pervasive feeling that this pandemic is nearly over. Whether that turns out to be true or not, as the thousands left bereaved by it begin to mark the one-year anniversaries of their losses, for them, the period of reflection will last as long as they do. Callum, Watkinson, ITV News.